The prairie was quiet that evening, almost too quiet. The kind of silence that makes a man's chest feel hollow, like the earth itself was holding its breath. Jack Briggs knew that silence well. 4 years, it had been his only company on this stretch of wild land. Once, his ranch had echoed with the laughter of his wife Clara and their boy Sam. Now there was only wind, dust, and the weight of memories that never seemed to leave. Jack sat on the porch of his cabin, boots resting on the rail, rifle across his lap. The sun was bleeding out behind the ridgeline, casting long shadows across the dry creek bed that cut through his land. That's when he heard it, soft at first like brush shifting under a coyote's paw. But this was heavier, uneven. He leaned forward, squinting into the fading light. From the thicket near the creek, a figure burst forward and stumbled hard into the dirt. Jack rose instantly, Winchester gripped tight, eyes narrowing. It wasn't a bandit or a drifter. It was a woman. Her dark skin was streaked with dried blood, her long black hair tangled with dust. Her clothes were torn, her arms covered in scrapes and bruises. She looked half dead, but her eyes, sharp and defiant, still burned with a fire that startled him. She raised both hands, her voice rasping, broken by thirst. "Don't shoot. Let me live. I can give you children." The words hit Jack like a blow to the chest. For a moment, all he saw was Clara, lying pale and broken in their bed years ago, the fever stealing her breath. He remembered Sam's small hands clutching his before the sickness took him too. The memory stung sharp, but Jack didn't lower the rifle. The woman staggered again, clutching her arm where bone pressed against bruised flesh. She looked like she'd been running for days, maybe weeks. Her body was failing, but her back stayed straight, like a soldier daring death to strike. Jack's jaw tightened. He could have walked away. He could have left her for the coyotes and convinced himself it wasn't his fight. But deep down he already knew, his life had just changed. He unhooked the canteen from his belt and tossed it to the ground between them. "Drink. Then come with me." The woman's eyes flickered, suspicious but desperate. She snatched the canteen and drained every drop. When she looked back at him, she gave the smallest nod, silent but resolute. Jack turned, heading toward the ranch house. Behind him, her footsteps dragged, uneven but steady, matching the rhythm of his own heart, pounding harder with every step. By the time they reached the barn, night had fallen. Jack pointed her to the stable, where the scent of hay lingered. She slid into the shadows, clutching something small and sharp in her hand. A knife, most likely. She was no helpless soul. Jack lingered on the porch, eyes fixed on the barn door. His land had always been a fortress of solitude, a place no one dared cross. But tonight, for the first time in years, the silence felt different. Not empty. Not dead. It felt like the beginning of something dangerous. And maybe, just maybe, something worth holding on to. The morning broke hot and dry, the kind of day when dust clings to your throat before you even saddle a horse. Jack Briggs stepped off his porch, stretching his back as the first rays burned over the horizon. The ranch had always woken with him, cattle lowing, wind whistling through the fence line, but today there was something new in the air. The barn door creaked faintly. Jack's hand instinctively dropped to the revolver on his hip before he remembered. The woman, Isla. She was still here. Jack approached slow, boots crunching over the dirt. He found her already awake, crouched beside the well, pulling up water in a bucket. Her hair, dark and heavy, stuck to her face as she splashed the cold water across her skin. She wasn't soft or timid. Every movement carried purpose, even in her exhaustion. Jack leaned against the post, watching. He expected her to act helpless, maybe beg. Instead, she rinsed her hands, then took the bucket back to the stable. Inside, she began sweeping away the old straw, cleaning the place like she'd lived here all her life. No words, no instructions, just work. Jack narrowed his eyes. Most folks wouldn't lift a finger without being told. This woman? She was different. By midday, trouble arrived in the form of a bawling calf breaking loose through a gap in the fence. Jack cursed under his breath, grabbing for the rope hanging on the rail. But before he could move, Isla limped across the yard, fast despite her stiff leg. "Hey!" Jack barked, but she ignored him, sprinting awkwardly toward the calf. Dust swirled as the animal darted, kicking up its hooves. With a sharp whistle and a quick swing of her arms, Isla cut it off and drove it back into the pen. She slammed the gate shut and leaned against the fence, panting, sweat streaking her dirt-stained face. Jack stood frozen a moment, rope dangling useless in his hands. The calf bawled once, then quieted. Isla pushed back her tangled hair and looked at him, breathing heavy but steady. Her eyes, dark and unflinching, met his. Jack didn't say much. He just gave a small nod and acknowledgement and turned back to repair the broken section of fence. But inside something had shifted. By late afternoon, Isla built a small fire near the barn. She pulled dried meat from a pouch she carried and roasted it over the flames. Jack walked over with a tin cup of warm milk. He didn't offer words, just set it down beside her. For a long moment neither spoke. The only sound was the fire crackling, the low rumble of cattle beyond the corral. When Jack finally walked back to the porch, he noticed Isla watching him, her eyes no longer guarded like a cornered animal. Not trusting, not yet. But not hostile either. That night, as the prairie wind swept across the land, Jack sat in his chair listening to the faint clink of wood as Isla secured the stable door. He realized his ranch, once a tomb of silence, now carried a second heartbeat, strange, defiant, alive. For the first time in years the emptiness didn't feel so endless. By dusk, the prairie sky turned the color of iron. Jack Briggs stacked firewood near the cabin, the air heavy with the scent of dust and oncoming rain. He paused when he caught the faint sound of coughing from the barn. Jack set down the axe and walked over, boots sinking into the softening earth. Inside, Isla sat against the wooden wall, her knees drawn up, face pale beneath the dirt. Sweat clung to her brow, her shoulders trembling with every breath. "You've got a fever," Jack said quietly, kneeling beside her. Her dark eyes narrowed with instinctive mistrust. Still, she didn't shove his hand away when he brushed damp hair back to see the wound on her calf. The cut was swollen, red around the edges, pus seeping out. Infection. Jack stood, his jaw tightening. He returned with a basin of hot water, a strip of cloth, and his hunting knife, its blade glowing red from the fire. Isla's hand shot to the knife she kept at her side. Jack held up his palm. "Easy. You'll lose the leg if I don't." For a moment, her eyes burned like she'd rather fight than submit. But then she leaned back, jaw clenched, and gave a short nod. Jack steadied himself. He pressed the blade into the wound, lancing the infection. Isla gritted her teeth, her fingers digging into the straw, but not a sound escaped her. Sweat rolled down her temple as Jack cleaned the wound with steady, careful movements. When it was done, he wrapped the leg with a clean cloth and placed a thick wool blanket beside her. "Rest. It's gonna rain tonight." Isla said nothing, only looked at him through heavy lashes, her breathing ragged. Jack stood, the faint patter of rain beginning to drum against the tin roof. Later, inside the cabin, Jack sat by the fire, rifle propped against the wall. Thunder growled over the hills. The door creaked, and there she was, Isla, clothes soaked through, blanket clutched in her arms. "Come in," Jack said, tossing another log into the flames. She moved closer to the hearth, stretching her broad hands toward the heat. Firelight danced across her scarred face, catching the small line etched along her cheekbone. For a long while she didn't speak. Then her voice, hoarse but steady, cut through the storm. "I was taken with my sister, Rosa. They tied us to a post, marched us like animals. She didn't survive. They hurt her. I cut myself free and ran. Haven't slept without fear since." Jack stared into the fire, his own chest tight. "I buried Clara and Sam on this land. Fever took them both. This house used to be full of voices. Now all I hear is the wind." The two sat in silence, the fire crackling between them like a fragile bridge. No promises, no soft words. Just two broken souls acknowledging the weight they carried. When Isla finally rose, she left the old blanket on the chair and wrapped herself in the new one Jack had given her. Her footsteps faded back toward the barn. Jack leaned back, listening to the rain pound the roof. The silence that followed wasn't the hollow kind he had known for years. It was warmer, steadier. Almost like shelter. The rain stopped sometime before dawn, leaving the earth soft and heavy with the scent of wet clay. Jack Briggs rose early, the way he always did, and headed out toward the northern fence with a box of nails under his arm. The air was sharp, still carrying the bite of last night's storm. Halfway across the pasture he stopped cold. The ground, dark and damp, carried a story written in the mud, hoofprints. Not cattle and not horses he recognized. 3 sets, pressed deep into the soil, pointing straight toward his ranch before curving away into the hills. Jack knelt down, pressing his calloused fingers into one of the tracks. Too fresh to ignore. Whoever they were, they'd been close. Too close. Back in the yard, Isla was carrying a bucket of water, her limp still visible but steadier than yesterday. She caught the look on Jack's face before he said a word. "What happened?" she asked, setting the bucket down. "Someone was here last night," Jack replied, his voice low and sharp. 3 riders. They circled close. Isla's eyes darkened, her jaw tightening. "They won't stop. If they found me they'll come back." Jack didn't answer right away. His hand rested on the Winchester slung over his shoulder. He knew the safe choice: send her away. Let her vanish into the hills so his land could return to silence. But as he looked at her, standing tall despite the pain in her leg, her eyes steady as stone, something twisted in his chest. "You can leave now," Jack said finally, his voice heavy. "If you move fast they might not catch your trail." Isla didn't flinch. She bent down, picked up the old knife from a wooden crate, checked the blade and slid it back into its sheath. "I've been running long enough," she said quietly. "If they come I'll be waiting." Jack studied her for a long moment. Then he gave a short nod. "Then we get ready." The rest of the day passed in hard, relentless work. Jack boarded up the cabin windows, hammering planks tight until his arms shook. Isla cleared dry straw from around the barn, stacking wood into neat piles, every movement efficient. They barely spoke, but the silence between them wasn't cold. It was the silence of two people bracing for the same storm. As the sun fell, the ranch took on the look of a fortress. Jack pulled a chair onto the porch, rifle across his lap. Isla sat by the barn door, spear tip grounded in the dirt, her dark eyes sweeping the horizon. Neither said a word. The prairie wind carried the faint smell of scorched grass, and Jack gripped the rifle stock tighter. If anyone dared set foot on his land tonight, they wouldn't walk away whole. From the porch, Jack's voice broke the quiet, low and rough. "I truly appreciate having you here." Isla's gaze flickered toward him, steady and unreadable. And for the first time in years, Jack didn't feel like a man waiting for the world to take everything from him. He felt like a man preparing to fight for what he still had left. The next morning, the sun rose red and unforgiving, beating down on the ranch like it meant to burn the land bare. Jack Briggs carried a box of nails out to the field, his shirt already damp with sweat. Isla followed a few steps behind, a bucket of water swinging from her hand. They worked side by side, mending the fences that had taken the worst of the storm. Jack was used to silence when he worked, used to carrying the weight alone. But today he didn't have to explain a thing. Isla seemed to understand what needed doing, stretching the barbed wire tight as he drove the posts into the ground. Her strength surprised him. She swung the hammer with a rhythm that matched his, steady and sure. Sweat trickled down her neck, glistening against bronze skin marked by scars that told their own stories. She wasn't soft like Clara had been, but there was something fierce and upright in her that Jack couldn't turn away from. Around midday, as Jack tugged a stretch of wire, it snapped loose with a sharp whine and whipped across the back of his hand. He hissed through his teeth, blood welling in a bright red slash. Before he could reach for a rag, Isla stepped forward, her voice firm. "Let me see." Jack hesitated but sat down on the nearest post, holding out his hand. Isla tore a strip from the cloth she carried, wrapping his wound with deliberate care. Her broad fingers were surprisingly gentle, moving slow and steady. Their eyes met in the heat of the afternoon, hers dark and unwavering. For a moment, the sounds of the prairie faded, the lowing cattle, the whistle of wind, until it was just the two of them in the stillness. "Thank you," Jack said quietly. Isla said nothing, only tied off the cloth and stepped back to her work. But something lingered in the air between them, taut as a rope pulled tight. By late afternoon, the cattle were herded back into the pen. Dust rose in swirling clouds, painting the horizon in gold as the sun began its slow descent. Jack leaned against a fence post, chest heaving, his shirt soaked through. Isla dropped onto the porch steps, sweat and dirt streaking her face, her breath coming fast but steady. For once, Jack didn't see a fugitive or a stranger. He saw a woman carved by hardship, still standing tall. That night, the two of them sat before the fire in the cabin. The flames snapped and hissed, sending sparks dancing up the chimney. Jack poured a cup of coffee and handed it to her. Isla took a sip, her gaze fixed on the firelight. The silence stretched, but it wasn't empty, it was thick with something unspoken, something neither dared to name. Jack leaned back in his chair, eyes lingering on her face, the scar on her cheek catching the glow. Isla slowly leaned forward, her lips brushing his in a kiss that came as natural as breathing. Not rushed, not forced, just an unspoken truth they had both been circling since the day she stumbled into his land. When it ended, Jack stood and tossed another log into the fire, trying to steady his breath. Isla turned away, but the corner of her mouth lifted, the faintest smile breaking through. That night, for the first time in years, Jack slept without waking to the howl of emptiness. The silence of the ranch had changed. It was no longer hollow. It was alive. The sky had turned gray, heavy with a stillness that pressed down on the land. Jack Briggs was mending a latch on the cattle pen when the sound of hoofbeats rolled across the prairie. At first faint, then louder, steady as a drumbeat. He straightened, wiping sweat from his brow, eyes narrowing toward the horizon. 3 riders appeared through the red haze of dust. They moved with a confidence that told Jack they weren't strangers passing through. These men had a purpose. Jack set the hammer aside and walked calmly to the porch. He lifted the Winchester from its place on the wall, loaded it with steady hands, and leaned against a post as the riders pulled up to the gate. The one in front was tall and lean, with a crooked smile that never reached his eyes. A black hat shadowed his face, but his voice carried sharp across the yard. "Name's Vern Crow," he called. "We heard tell there's an Apache woman hiding out around here. Hand her over and you won't have trouble." Behind him the other 2, Duke and Clay, shifted in their saddles, eyes sweeping the barn and the house like vultures circling. Jack's grip on the rifle tightened, but he kept his voice calm. "This is my land. There's no one here but me." Vern's smile twisted into a sneer. "That's so." His gaze drifted past Jack, landing on the barn door where Isla had just stepped into view, spear in hand. Jack's chest tightened. Isla walked forward, slow and deliberate, until she stood beside him on the porch. Her shoulders were bare, scars catching the pale light, her dark eyes fixed on the riders. She didn't lower her spear. Vern chuckled. "Well, looks like you lied to me, Briggs. That woman there, she's ours." Jack's voice came out like steel. "She stays. You ride back the way you came." For a moment no one moved. The air grew heavy, thick with the promise of violence. Duke's hand twitched near his revolver, but Vern lifted a hand to stop him. "You're making a mistake, old man," Vern said, spitting into the dirt. "We'll be back. And when we return, you'll regret choosing her." He yanked the reins, turning his horse. The others followed, their silhouettes swallowed by the dust they kicked up as they rode off. Jack lowered the Winchester slowly, his shoulders tight, his jaw clenched. He could feel Isla's presence at his side, solid and unshaken. "They will not stop," she said, her voice low. Jack nodded. "Then neither will we." That afternoon, the ranch became a battlefield waiting to happen. Jack reinforced the doors with heavy planks and hammered extra latches on the windows. Isla dug trenches around the barn to guard against fire, her movements swift and practiced. When the sun dipped low, they sat by the firelight, Jack cleaning his rifle with careful strokes, Isla sharpening her spear until the edge gleamed. Outside, the prairie was silent, but it wasn't peace. It was the hush before a storm. Jack looked at Isla, her face caught in the golden glow of the flames, her expression carved from stone. He knew what was coming. And for the first time in years he didn't dread the fight. He was ready for it. By nightfall the air grew thick with the smell of rain. Thunder rolled across the plains like a warning, and the wind snapped the branches of the cottonwoods along the creek. Jack Briggs sat at the table inside the cabin, Winchester laid across the wood, listening to the steady drum of the storm. His ranch had become a fortress, but he knew Vern Crow and his riders would come back. Men like that always did. The cabin door creaked open. Jack's head snapped up, hand instinctively reaching for the rifle. But it wasn't trouble. It was Isla. She was soaked through, a blanket clinging to her shoulders, a cloth bag slung across her back. She moved quickly toward the fence line, her figure blurring in the sheets of rain. Jack shoved the rifle aside and bolted into the storm. "Isla," he shouted, his voice cutting through the downpour. She froze mid-step, shoulders tense. Slowly she turned. Her dark hair was plastered to her face, rain streaming down her cheeks like tears. Her voice carried sharp over the roar of thunder. "I can't let you lose everything because of me. If I leave, they won't hurt you." Jack stepped closer, boots sinking in the mud, rain lashing across his face. "You think I'd let you just vanish into the night?" Her eyes flared, fierce even in exhaustion. "You don't owe me anything, Jack. I'm the one who dragged this danger here." He took another step, his chest heaving. "Listen to me. I've already buried Clara and Sam on this land. I've lost everything I thought I'd never live without. If you walk away now, all I'll have left is one more regret." Isla's hand tightened on the strap of her bag. Lightning split the sky, flashing white across the prairie. Her voice trembled, not with fear but with something deeper. "Are you not afraid of what it'll cost you to keep me here?" Jack's voice cracked, raw with truth. "I'd rather lose this whole ranch than lose you." The storm seemed to pause in that instant, the thunder swallowed by silence. Isla's chest rose and fell, her dark eyes locked on his. Then the bag slipped from her hand, landing in the mud with a soft thud. She stepped toward him, the blanket sliding from her shoulders. Jack closed the gap, gripping her shoulders with rain-slick hands. "No," he said, steady now. Because I'm not alone anymore. For a heartbeat, neither moved. The only sound was the storm raging around them. Then Isla let the blanket fall completely, standing tall like a warrior unbroken. Side by side they turned back toward the cabin, the rain pouring over them, soaking them to the bone. Inside, Jack threw more wood onto the fire. The flames leapt high, chasing shadows from the corners. Isla sat against the wall, her spear within reach, her eyes following Jack as he cleaned the rifle with steady, practiced movements. For the first time since she had stumbled into his life, it wasn't just two broken souls taking shelter under the same roof. It was something stronger. They weren't merely surviving the storm. They were preparing to face the morning, together. The dawn burned red across the horizon, the kind of sunrise that carried more warning than promise. Jack Briggs stood on the porch, Winchester already loaded, eyes fixed on the open prairie. Isla tied her hair back tight, her spear propped against the cabin door. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. Both knew this morning would test them. The sound of hoofbeats came first, faint but steady. Jack's jaw clenched. Dust swirled up from the dry road, and soon 5 riders emerged through the haze, their silhouettes sharp in the rising sun. At the front rode Vern Crow, tall and lean, his black hat pulled low, his grin meaner than a rattlesnake. Duke and Clay flanked him, 2 more outlaws trailing behind. The horses stopped just short of the gate. Vern spit into the dirt, his voice carrying across the yard. "One last chance, Briggs. Hand her over and you keep your life." Jack didn't move from the porch. He raised the Winchester, the barrel catching the morning light. His voice was calm, steel-hard. "You set foot past that fence and none of you leave whole." The air tightened like a rope pulled taut. Isla stepped down from the porch, her bare shoulders glistening with sweat, spear steady in her grip. She stood like a statue carved from bronze, her eyes locked on the riders. Duke chuckled low. "Hell, she's got fight in her. Almost a shame." "Quiet," Vern snapped. His sneer deepened as his gaze shifted between Jack and Isla. "You think you can stand against all of us? This ranch ain't worth dying for." Jack's voice cut sharp. "This isn't about land." A silence followed, heavy enough to break a man's will. But Jack didn't blink and neither did Isla. Vern's hand twitched toward his revolver, but he didn't draw. Instead he leaned forward in the saddle. "Then you've made your choice." He jerked the reins, turning his horse. "We'll be back before long and when we come, this place will burn." The 5 of them wheeled around, galloping off in a cloud of red dust. Jack lowered the rifle, his shoulders tight, breath slow and controlled. "They'll bring more," Isla said, her voice steady. Jack nodded. "Then we'll be ready." The rest of the day turned into preparation. Jack stacked sandbags across the entryway, set barrels of water near the barn in case of fire. Isla gathered kindling, dug the trenches deeper, her movements tireless despite the ache in her leg. They worked without pause, side by side, the unspoken truth binding them closer than any vow. By nightfall, the ranch looked less like a home and more like a stronghold. Jack pulled a chair onto the porch, rifle resting across his lap. Isla sat by the fire just beyond the barn, sharpening her spear with slow, deliberate strokes. The prairie stretched silent under the weight of coming violence. Jack's eyes drifted toward Isla, her face illuminated by the golden glow. The sparks from her fire leapt upward, like tiny embers of defiance against the vast, dark night. Neither said a word. They didn't have to. The silence wasn't fear, it was the kind of stillness 2 warriors shared before battle. And Jack Briggs knew, if Vern Crow came back, the prairie would drink blood before either of them surrendered. The wind carried the smell of smoke from somewhere far off, and the clouds rolling over the plains looked darker than gunmetal. Jack Briggs sat at the table inside the cabin, Winchester laid across the wood, listening to the restless night. Every creak in the timbers, every gust against the shutters felt like a warning. Outside, the storm broke with sudden fury. Rain hammered the tin roof, thunder cracked across the sky, and lightning turned the prairie white. Jack rose to check the door and froze. The barn door was open. He grabbed the lantern and stepped out into the storm. Rain poured down in sheets, soaking his shirt in seconds. Through the downpour he spotted her. Isla moving quick across the muddy yard, a blanket clutched around her shoulders, a small pack slung across her back. She was heading for the fence line. "Isla." Jack's voice cut through the storm. She stopped, her shoulders stiffening. Slowly she turned, rain running down her face like tears. Her eyes blazed with defiance, but her voice carried pain. "I can't stay, Jack. I won't let them destroy you because of me. If I leave, you can still have peace." Jack trudged forward, mud sucking at his boots, his heart pounding harder than the thunder. You think I care about peace? His voice broke, raw with anger and something deeper. I've been living with silence for years. Buried Clara. Buried Sam. I already lost everything worth keeping. If you walk away now, all I'll have left is regret. Her grip tightened on the strap of her pack. Lightning split the sky, flashing across her face, fierce and proud even in the rain. You don't owe me anything, she said. I'm the one who brought this fight here. Jack shook his head, water dripping from his hat brim. He took another step closer, his voice low and fierce. You think this is about owing you? I'd rather lose this whole ranch than lose you. The storm seemed to fall quiet in that instant, the roar of rain muffled by the weight of his words. Isla stared at him, her chest rising and falling, her eyes shining like embers refusing to die. Then the pack slipped from her shoulder, landing in the mud with a dull thud. Slowly she stepped toward him, letting the blanket slide away, leaving her standing tall in the storm, unafraid. Jack reached out, his hands gripping her shoulders. His voice steadied, calmer now. No, I'm not afraid of the cost. Because I'm not alone anymore. They stood like that in the pouring rain, two figures locked together against a world that wanted to break them apart. And for the first time, the storm didn't feel like an ending. It felt like a beginning. Together they turned back toward the cabin, rain soaking their clothes, lightning flashing above them. Jack threw more wood onto the fire, the flames leaping bright against the dark. Isla sat close to the hearth, her spear propped against the wall, her gaze following Jack as he cleaned the Winchester with deliberate care. This wasn't just two lost souls sharing shelter anymore. They were bound by choice, not chance. Allies, partners, ready to face whatever waited at dawn. And Jack Briggs knew the fight was coming. But he also knew he wouldn't face it alone. The morning came painted in fire. The horizon glowed red, as if the sky itself was warning of the blood that would soon be spilled. Jack Briggs stood on the porch with his Winchester, every muscle tight, eyes locked on the open prairie. Isla tied her hair back, her spear leaning against the doorframe. They didn't trade words, none were needed. The sound of hoofbeats cut through the dawn. This time there was no mistaking the threat. Dust billowed up as Vern Crow rode in at the head of 5 men, Duke and Clay among them, pistols gleaming at their sides. They reined up at the gate. Vern leaned forward in the saddle, his crooked grin spreading slow and cold. One last time, Briggs, he shouted. Hand her over and you live. Stand in our way and we'll burn this place to ash. Jack raised the Winchester, the barrel catching the first light of day. His voice was steady as steel. Step past that fence and none of you leave whole. A tense silence fell, broken only by the restless snorts of the horses. Isla stepped down from the porch, bare shoulders gleaming with sweat despite the morning chill. She planted her spear in the dirt, her stance solid, her dark eyes unflinching. Vern's smile vanished. So be it. His hand jerked and gunfire erupted. A bullet tore into the fence post, splinters flying. Jack dropped behind the sandbags, returning fire with sharp, measured shots. Isla darted low, moving with a predator's grace, her spear flashing as she drove back one outlaw who tried to rush the barn. The yard exploded into chaos, hooves pounding, guns cracking, smoke rising. Jack fired again, dropping Clay's hat clean off his head and forcing him back. Duke cursed, his revolver barking, but Jack's next shot sent him sprawling into the dust. Vern pressed harder, his revolver blazing. Jack felt a bullet skim his sleeve, close enough to burn. He ducked, teeth clenched, and fired back, the Winchester bucking in his hands. Vern's horse screamed, rearing, and Vern tumbled to the ground. Before he could rise, Isla was there. Her spear struck the dirt inches from his chest, the tip steady, her eyes fierce. Vern froze, chest heaving. Jack strode forward, rifle aimed square at the outlaw leader. The yard had gone silent, the other riders retreating into the haze of dust, leaving their leader behind. You're finished here, Jack said, voice low and final. Vern's sneer faltered. He spat once into the dirt, then staggered back to his horse, mounting with shaking hands. Without another word, he kicked the animal hard and galloped away, disappearing into the wide, empty plains. Silence fell heavy across the ranch, broken only by the echo of hoofbeats fading into nothing. Jack lowered the Winchester, his shoulders sagging with exhaustion. Isla straightened, pulling her spear free from the ground. Their eyes met across the yard, the morning light catching in both. For the first time, Jack didn't just see a woman who had stumbled onto his land. He saw a partner, a fighter, someone who had stood when the world wanted her broken. Together they rebuilt the fence that afternoon, driving in fresh posts, dust rising golden in the sunlight. When the work was done, Jack leaned on the rail, watching the prairie stretch endless before them. Isla stepped up beside him, her wide hand finding his calloused one. "This ranch," she said softly, "it's mine now too." Jack nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "And you're not going anywhere." As dusk settled, they sat side by side on the porch steps. The glow from the cabin fire spilled across the yard, shadows stretching long and peaceful. For the first time in years, Jack Briggs felt the land wasn't just something to protect. It was a home. Dear friends, what would you have done in Jack's place? Would you have risked everything for love or sent Isla away to save your land? Thank you for riding through this story with me. If it touched you, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next tale from the Wild West.